Have you ever loved someone so completely that you gave up pieces of yourself, one at a time, and didn't even notice you were disappearing until almost nothing was left? I understand that feeling in a way I wish I didn't, and I know the exact moment I began coming back to myself, standing very still in a hospital corridor, hidden around a corner, listening to my husband laugh about me like I was the punchline to a joke only he found funny. My name is Gwen, and I want to tell you about the 6 days before I finally chose to leave. 3 years earlier, my husband and I had built something I was proud of. We weren't wealthy, but we were steady. I worked as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in Hamilton, Ontario, a job I had trained years for, a job I genuinely loved. My husband worked in commercial construction. Long hours, physical work, the kind of job that paid well in good weeks and left him exhausted on the couch by Friday evening. We had a small house with a backyard we kept meaning to fix up. We talked about children sometimes, casually, the way people do when they believe the future is still wide open and full of time. Then, on a Thursday morning in February, everything stopped. He fell 12 feet from a scaffold on a job site. The impact fractured 2 vertebrae in his lower back and damaged the nerves running down his left leg. He wasn't paralyzed, but he wasn't the man I knew either. The pain was constant. Walking was possible only for short distances. Stairs were a daily struggle. He came home from the hospital with a walker, a thick folder of discharge instructions, and a WSIB claim that we were told could take months to properly process. I didn't hesitate, not even for a moment. I had spent years helping patients relearn how to live in bodies that had changed without their permission. I understood the anatomy of his injury. I understood the exercise protocols, and the rest cycles, and the medication schedules better than most. It seemed obvious to me that I should be the one helping him through it. I took a leave of absence from the rehab center, which I fully intended to use until he no longer needed me. That leave became a year, and then another year, and then a third. I want you to understand what those 3 years actually looked like, because the phrase, caring for someone, doesn't come close to capturing the weight of it. My mornings began before 6. I helped my husband sit up in bed, helped him manage the muscle spasms that were always worst when he first woke, and got him safely to the bathroom. I prepared his meals around the anti-inflammatory diet his specialist recommended. I kept a notebook on the kitchen counter with his medication times, 3 different prescriptions, each with specific instructions about food and spacing. I drove him to physiotherapy twice a week on Upper James Street, waited during each session, and helped him complete the at-home exercises his physiotherapist assigned between visits. I filled out WSIB forms and appealed decisions and spent long afternoons on hold with the insurance office, sometimes waiting 2 hours before speaking with anyone. I handled every bill, every benefit renewal, every online portal, every appointment reminder. When his pain was bad, I heated the wheat bag, adjusted his pillows, and sat quietly with him, because sometimes that was the only thing that helped. At night, I slept lightly. He would call out sometimes in the small hours, because the pain had spiked or his leg had seized up. I learned to move through the dark without turning on a light, because the light bothered him. My own body began to show the strain in quiet, persistent ways. I developed a tension headache that lasted for months. My lower back, already strained from years of patient transfers at work, began aching on the heaviest days. I lost weight without meaning to, because I was always too focused on getting his food ready to remember to eat my own. I noticed my phone growing quiet. My friends, the ones from the rehab center, the ones from university, stopped sending messages as often, because I almost always replied the same way. Sorry, it's been a lot lately. Can we figure something out next month? At first, they were understanding. Over time, the invitations simply stopped arriving. I told myself that was fair. I told myself I could rebuild those friendships once things settled down. I kept believing things would settle down. In the first year, my husband was grateful. He said it often, "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're the reason I'm getting through this." Those words carried me through a lot of hard days. But somewhere in the second year, the gratitude stopped being something he expressed and became something he simply assumed. He stopped thanking me when I brought his medication on time. He started getting irritated if dinner wasn't ready at his usual hour. He became short with me if I was slow to respond when he called from the other room. I noticed the change, but I explained it away. He was in pain. He was frustrated with his limitations. He was grieving the version of himself that had moved through the world freely. Of course, he was difficult sometimes. I never told him how tired I was. I never mentioned the headaches or the backache. I never said anything that might make him feel like a burden. 6 days before I left, I drove him to his physiotherapy session. It was a Tuesday morning. The waiting room was the same as it always was: pale gray chairs, a water cooler humming in the corner, a wall-mounted television showing a morning program nobody was watching. I checked him in, helped him get settled, and sat down with my phone to review the latest batch of WSIB paperwork that had arrived over the weekend. When the physiotherapist called him in, the receptionist asked if I could sign an updated consent form and collect a referral letter from the administrative office just down the hall. I told my husband I'd be back in a few minutes. He was already looking at his phone and didn't reply. I was walking back with the folder when I heard laughter. I recognized his voice immediately. My husband had an old friend, someone he'd known since his 20s, someone he spoke to occasionally on the phone. From the sound of it, this friend had come in for his own appointment that same morning, and the two of them had found a quiet corner near the hallway to catch up. My husband's wheelchair was angled away from the corridor opening. I slowed down without thinking, and then I stopped entirely. "She handles everything," my husband was saying. His voice was easy, almost amused. "Meals, appointments, medications, all the WSIB paperwork. She used to be an OT, so she actually knows what she's doing. Lucky timing, right?" For one moment, I thought maybe he was talking about me, the way people sometimes do when they're proud of someone they love. Then his old friend said something I couldn't fully hear, and my husband laughed a little harder. "Leave? She's not going anywhere. She'd feel too guilty. I mean, I'm not going to tell her to go, am I? Honestly, it works out. Basically a live-in caretaker, except I don't have to pay the agency rate." The folder pressed flat against my chest. "Besides," he continued, still laughing, "where would she even go back to? She's been out of the field for 3 years. The longer she stays, the harder it gets to leave." I stood there for a long moment. I did not move. I did not make a sound. Every early morning rose up in my memory at once. Every meal I had prepared while my own back ached. Every hour I had spent on hold with the insurance office. Every plan I had canceled, every friendship I had let drift, every night I had slept lightly and woken in the dark because he had called out. I had not once, in 3 years, thought of myself as a caretaker. I had thought of myself as his wife. I turned around and walked slowly back to a chair near the entrance and sat down. I breathed. I did not cry. There was something very still inside me, very clear and cold, the way air becomes just before snow. That evening, after we got home, I made dinner. I helped him with his evening exercises. I brought his medication at the correct time and placed it beside his water glass without being asked. He watched television while I cleared the kitchen. He didn't notice that I was quiet. He rarely did. When the house was finally still and he had gone to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the yellow notepad I had always used to track his medication schedule, and I wrote down every single thing I did in one day. The list filled 3 pages. Morning care, medication schedule, kitchen cleaning, laundry, grocery runs to the store on Fennel Avenue, cooking, driving to physiotherapy twice a week, specialist referral follow-ups, WSIB claim updates and appeals, phone calls with the insurance office, prescription renewals, organizing the binder of medical records, following up on the long-term disability application, paying bills, ensuring the bathroom was safe, checking that the grab bars were properly secured, ordering compression stockings online, managing the household finances, keeping him moving, keeping everything moving. I looked at those 3 pages for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and found my old email login from my days at the rehab center. I navigated to the director's contact page and wrote her a message. 2 careful paragraphs, explaining that I had been on personal leave for 3 years, that I had maintained my registration with the College of Occupational Therapists of Ontario throughout that entire time, and that I wanted to know whether there were any openings at the clinic. I reread the message 4 times, then I pressed send. When I closed the laptop, I felt something I hadn't recognized in years. Not quite happiness, something quieter than that. Something that felt like a door that had been shut for a very long time, cracking open just slightly. My husband slept through all of it. He had no idea that anything had changed. The next morning, he asked me to pick up his prescription before his afternoon appointment. I said I would. He asked what was for breakfast. I told him. He turned back to the news. I checked my email at 9, while he was in the shower. The director had already replied. She remembered me. She said she was genuinely glad to hear from me. She mentioned that they had recently lost a senior OT to a position out west, and that there might be something worth discussing. She asked whether I could come in later that week. I read the message twice, then a third time. For 3 years, I had existed in my husband's world as a function. I managed the medications, I arranged the appointments, I submitted the forms. I had become so absorbed in what he needed that I had stopped knowing what I needed, or even what I was still capable of, beyond these walls and this routine that had quietly swallowed me whole. Someone had just remembered who I was before any of this. I wrote back and confirmed Thursday morning. I did not tell my husband. It wasn't dishonesty. I simply wasn't ready to defend a decision I was still carefully building, because I knew if I said anything too soon, he would find a way to make me feel responsible for his reaction. He had always been good at that. That same afternoon, while he rested, I sat at the kitchen table and looked up home and community care support services, the provincially funded program providing in-home care for Ontarians with ongoing medical needs. I read about the assessment process, the PSW services, the nursing visits and therapy support available. I submitted a care request on his behalf online, providing his diagnosis and his doctor's information. A coordinator would be in contact within 2 business days. Then I spent an hour looking at private home care agencies in Hamilton. I compared their hourly rates, their service packages, their reviews. Qualified PSWs in the area were billing between $22 and $28 an hour through licensed agencies. For the hours of genuine daily care he required, a professional service would cost between $4,000 and $5,500 a month. I sat with that number for a while. $4,000 a month. For 3 years I had provided that care for free. I had paid for it with my career, with my health, with my social life and my sleep and my sense of self. I had maintained my professional registration at my own expense, year after year, because I had kept telling myself I would eventually return to work. I had paid for it with the version of me that used to look forward to Mondays, that used to have plans for Saturday evenings, that used to be someone other than a woman waiting alone in a clinic hallway. My care had never been free, it had simply been invisible, even to me. After that, every decision I made became very practical and very quiet. I opened a separate checking account at a different branch. I reviewed my savings, which were modest but workable. I searched online for apartments available near the rehab center and found a 1-bedroom on Locke Street South, 2nd floor, bright rear-facing windows, $1,800 a month. I drove past the building the following afternoon, after dropping my husband home from his appointment. I sat in the car and looked up at the window for a moment. I had not made a single decision entirely for myself in 3 years. On Thursday morning, I went to the interview. I told my husband I had a few errands to run before his afternoon medications. He reminded me to pick up his calcium supplements. At the rehab center, the administrative assistant recognized me from across the lobby and smiled. The director met me herself. We talked for just over an hour. I told her honestly about the past 3 years, the accident, the leave, maintaining my registration, all of it. She listened carefully, and then she said something I hadn't expected. She told me those 3 years were not a gap. They were experience, real, applied, complicated experience supporting a complex patient through a lengthy recovery process. The kind of experience that made occupational therapists more thoughtful, not less capable. She offered me a position before I left the building. I signed the paperwork at the front desk and walked to my car. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I drove to Locke Street South and completed the rental application, paid the deposit and collected the keys. They were light in my hand and felt impossibly significant. That evening, the home care coordinator phoned. We went through my husband's assessment in detail and confirmed what services he qualified for through the provincial program. PSW visits would begin within the week, covering morning and evening routines. For the remaining hours, the private agency I had researched could provide supplemental support. I spent the rest of the night building a binder, medication schedule, physiotherapy appointments, specialist contacts, pharmacy information, Fictional, the WSIB case file reference numbers, emergency contacts, his GP's direct number, instructions for every routine that I had been carrying entirely in my own memory for 3 years. All of it written out clearly, in plain language, for anyone who hadn't lived inside this house and learned it the way I had. I checked the binder twice, then once more. He needed to be cared for. That was still true, regardless of everything I had heard in that corridor. He had a real injury and real daily needs, and I was not the kind of person who would leave someone without ensuring those needs were properly covered. But there is a meaningful difference between making certain someone is cared for and sacrificing yourself to do the caring. I understood that distinction now in a way I had refused to see for far too long. That night, while I was organizing the final section of the binder, I heard him talking on the phone in the living room. His voice carried easily through the house when he wasn't paying attention to it. "She'll handle it," he said, laughing quietly at something his friend had replied. "She always does." I set my pen down slowly. There was no sharp pain this time. The first time, in that clinic corridor, I had felt something winded and physical, the sensation of being struck without warning. But hearing it again, there was only a very clear stillness, like a long-awaited decision that finally stops feeling like a decision at all. I finished the binder and placed it on the kitchen counter. I packed the last of my things into the bag I had been quietly filling for 2 days. I set my alarm for earlier than usual. The morning I left, I woke before 5. I made coffee and sat in the dark kitchen for a while, just listening to the house. I knew every sound it made, the particular click of the furnace coming on, the low hum of the refrigerator, the creak from the second step on the staircase. I had lived inside those sounds for 3 years. I would not miss them. I would miss who I had believed I was, inside this house, before I understood what I had quietly allowed myself to become. I helped my husband get up when he woke at 7, helped him to the bathroom, brought his morning medication, placed his breakfast on the table. He thanked me without looking away from his phone. It was such an ordinary morning that for one small moment I felt the familiar pull, the guilt, the worry, the voice that said I was making a mistake. I recognized that voice now for exactly what it was, not love habit. After breakfast, I carried the binder to the table and set it in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything you'll need," I said. My voice stayed steady. "Your medication times, your physiotherapy schedule, the WSIB case reference number, the PSW contact from Home and Community Care. They're starting visits this week. The private agency's information is there as well for the additional hours. The home care coordinator's direct line is on page 2. He looked from the binder to me. "What are you talking about?" "I've accepted a position at the rehab center," I said. "I've also signed a lease on an apartment. I'm moving there today." He stared at me. The silence stretched long enough that I counted it in my own heartbeat. "You can't be serious," he said. "I am," I replied. "I've spent 3 years caring for you because I loved you, and because I believed that loving someone meant being there at any cost to myself. But somewhere along the way, showing up stopped being something I chose freely, and became something you counted on because you were certain I had no other option." "I heard you say so." He went still. "A wife is a partner," I said. "She isn't a service. I don't know exactly when you stopped being able to tell the difference, but I know I waited far too long to tell you that I could." A knock at the front door. The PSW from the home care agency had arrived exactly on schedule. I introduced her, walked her through the binder, showed her the medication shelf and the exercise sheet on the refrigerator, and answered her questions until she had everything she needed. Then I picked up my bag. My husband called my name. He was still at the table, the binder open in front of him, looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. Something between shock and the slow, reluctant arrival of understanding. I turned around once. "The physiotherapist's mobile number is on page 3, I said. "Call if anything urgent comes up. You're in good hands." I closed the door behind me and walked to my car in the October cold, my breath fogging in the morning air, the apartment keys already in my hand. The weeks that followed were quiet and strange and slowly, steadily mine again. I went back to the rehab center and found that the work returned to me the way old muscle memory does. Cautiously at first, and then all at once. I stayed late some evenings not because anyone expected it, but because I had missed caring for people who could tell me what they needed, who said thank you and meant it. I bought groceries for myself and discovered I had forgotten some of my own favorite things. I called a friend I hadn't spoken to properly in 2 years, and she answered on the second ring and said simply, "I was wondering when you'd call." My husband phoned several times in the first 2 weeks. I answered once. "I hope you're managing," I said. "The support workers should have everything they need." I made sure it was all arranged carefully. "Gwen," he started. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I want you to be safe. I've made sure of that, but I can't be the one doing it anymore." Several months later, he asked through his sister whether I would be willing to meet him once. I thought about it for a few days and then agreed, because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life avoiding something I had already survived. We met at a small coffee shop near the waterfront, the kind that doesn't belong to a chain, with mismatched chairs and the smell of something freshly baked. He looked older than I expected, not dramatically, just in the way people look when they've had to figure out something difficult, without anyone to figure it out for them. He told me he hadn't understood what he'd had until it was gone. He said he had believed, somewhere in the part of himself he'd never examined closely, that because I was capable and trained and organized, the work hadn't cost me the way it would have cost someone else. He said he was ashamed he had let himself believe that for as long as he had. I listened to all of it. I believe he meant every word. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I accept that." He looked at the table. "Is there any possibility?" "No," I said. "It wasn't unkind. It was simply the truest answer I had. I waited 3 years to be seen. I don't think that changes now." I walked home from that coffee shop along the waterfront path, the lake flat and gray to my left, the city quiet around me. I wasn't sad exactly. I was something that didn't have a clean name. A kind of clear-eyed honesty about the shape of things, finally, after a long time of refusing to look directly at them. I had loved my husband. I had cared for him with everything I had. And somewhere in those 3 years, I had let love become an excuse to make myself disappear. Choosing to leave was not the hardest thing I had ever done. The hardest thing was admitting how long I had already been gone, and deciding, at last, that I was worth the journey back. If you have ever given yourself completely to someone who forgot to truly see you, I want you to know this. The cost of remaining invisible is never small, and the life waiting for you on the other side of that door is still yours. It does not expire. It does not go anywhere. It simply waits quietly until you are ready to come home to it.